They never planned it this way. In fact, when Yaman and Demet Özdemir first met, the last thing they wanted was to blur the line between fiction and reality. Both of them were professionals, both determined to protect their careers, and both carrying private lives they did not want to mix with work. And yet, there was something undeniable from the very first day. It wasn't just chemistry, it was a spark that couldn't be ignored. On set, surrounded by lights, cameras, and dozens of crew members, they made a promise to themselves: we will not fall in love. This is a story for the audience, nothing more. They whispered it almost like a mantra, convincing themselves it was possible. They laughed at the idea of actors getting carried away by their own roles. They told friends, we're just colleagues, we know better than that. But then the long nights of shooting began to blur into something else. They shared coffee during breaks, whispered lines back and forth, and laughed at mistakes that only they could understand. And as the cameras rolled, their scripted kisses no longer felt scripted, their lingering glances lasted a second too long, and their voices trembled in ways no director could ever instruct. For Demet, it was terrifying. She had always kept her private life locked away from the world, careful not to let anyone see too deeply. Can, on the other hand, was fiery, magnetic, a man who drew attention without even trying. He had a strength that felt protective but also dangerous. She reminded herself of the promise they both did. Don't cross the line. And yet, the line was already fading. After a particularly emotional scene, when the director finally called cut, neither of them moved. The crew shuffled around, packing equipment, chatting loudly, but Can and Demet stayed frozen, their eyes locked. For a moment, it wasn't Can the actor and Demet the actress. It was simply two people standing too close, breathing the same air, and realizing that their promise had already been broken. That night, Demet wrote in her private diary, the one she never shared with anyone, we promised not to fall, but I feel myself falling. At first, they tried to laugh it off. It's just the script, Ken would say, his voice steady but his eyes betraying something more. Demet would nod quickly, too quickly, as if trying to convince herself. But the truth was creeping in between every scene, every rehearsal, every moment when the cameras weren't rolling yet the electricity in the air was unmistakable. It started with small things. Ken began to notice when Demet was tired, offering her water before she even asked. Demet, without realizing it, found herself waiting for his arrival every morning, scanning the set until she saw him walk in with that confident stride. They told themselves it was normal, that it was just friendship. But the crew wasn't blind. Whispers spread quietly. Did you see the way he looks at her? They're too good at pretending, it can't all be acting. The tension only grew during the most intimate scenes. When they held hands for the camera, their fingers lingered long after the director said cut. When they argued in character, the anger carried a rawness that even shocked the writers. And when their lips met, no one could ignore the silence that followed, a silence too heavy for two people who were just acting. One night, after an exhausting day of shooting, the cast and crew gathered for dinner. Laughter filled the room, glasses clinked, stories were shared. Yet Can and Demet found themselves drifting to the corner, away from everyone else. He leaned closer, his voice low so no one else could hear. Do you ever wonder if we're lying to ourselves? He asked. Demet froze. She felt the weight of the promise they had made, the one they were both breaking, piece by piece. She forced a smile, shaking her head as if to dismiss it. We said we wouldn't, she whispered. But Can's eyes held hers, steady, unflinching. And yet here we are. That night, she couldn't sleep. She replayed his words over and over, each one cutting deeper than the last. She thought about the risk, the tabloids, the gossip, the possibility that everything they built could collapse if the world found out. But she also thought about the warmth she felt whenever he was near, the way her heart raced with every glance. Fiction had become reality, and there was no turning back. When the next morning came, Demet arrived on set earlier than usual, her heart heavy but her decision clear. She didn't know what she was about to face, but she knew one thing with certainty, the promise they had once made no longer belonged to them. the air on set had changed. Everyone felt it, though no one dared to speak about it openly. The director was thrilled, believing their natural chemistry was simply extraordinary talent. Fans watching the episodes were convinced that the romance on screen was more than just a story, something real was burning between them. But only Can and Demet knew how heavy that truth was. It happened on a night that neither of them could forget. They were filming a scene that was meant to be simple, a quiet conversation under the stars, two characters sharing secrets. The dialogue was written, the lines rehearsed, but when the cameras rolled, something else entirely unfolded. Can looked into Demet's eyes, and for the first time, he forgot his lines. The crew waited in silence, expecting him to recover, but he didn't. Instead, he spoke words that weren't in the script at all. "You know I can't pretend with you anymore." Demet froze. Her breath caught, her chest tightened, and for a moment, she forgot they were even on set. The line wasn't his character's, it was Can's. And it was meant for her, not for the world watching. The director, thinking it was brilliant improvisation, let the scene continue. But what happened next was beyond acting. Demet answered, her voice trembling, "Then don't." When the camera finally cut, the silence in the studio was suffocating. The crew clapped, some even cheered, praising the realism of their performance. But Demet knew the truth, they had just crossed a line they could never return from. Later that evening, she sat in her car, gripping the steering wheel tightly, tears welling in her eyes. Her phone buzzed, it was a message from Can. Just 3 words, "We broke it." She stared at the screen, her heart pounding. The promise. The rule they had built their entire relationship on. They had broken it in front of everyone, and yet no one else truly understood. Her fingers hovered over the phone, uncertain if she should reply. But before she could type anything, another message came, "Meet me." That night, away from cameras, away from scripts, they finally spoke the words that had been buried beneath months of denial. The world outside didn't matter. Gossip, tabloids, consequences, all of it faded. For once, it was just Can and Demet, two people who had promised not to fall in love, and who finally admitted that they had. Demet would later write in her diary again, "I told myself it was impossible. But love doesn't ask for permission. It just happens." And from that night on, nothing between them was the same. Once they admitted it, everything felt both easier and infinitely harder. On one hand, the tension between them finally had a name, love. No more pretending, no more silent glances that burned with unspoken truth. But on the other hand, every step they took was now dangerous, every whisper threatened by the possibility of being overheard. They decided to keep it a secret. Not because they were ashamed, but because the world around them was relentless. Fans dissected every look, tabloids built entire stories out of a single photograph, and gossip shows were hungry for scandal. If anyone discovered what was truly happening, it wouldn't just be about them, it could threaten their careers, their reputations, even their families. So they built their own world in the shadows. Quick phone calls after midnight, secret meetings in quiet corners of the city, coded text messages that only they could understand. To outsiders, they were still just colleagues, but to each other, they were everything. Demet, however, carried the weight of fear. She had always been cautious, always aware of how fragile happiness could be. She worried about her family, about her fans, about the way people judged women harsher than men. But Can, fiery as ever, didn't care. "Let them talk," he would say, brushing off her concerns. "They don't know us. They don't know what this is." And yet, she couldn't silence the voice inside her. Every time she saw a camera flash, her heart raced. Every time she saw their names trending online, she feared the truth would slip out. Still, when she was with him, all those fears melted away. He had a way of making her feel safe, like the chaos of the world couldn't touch them if they were together. There was one night in particular that sealed it. After a long day of filming, they escaped to the coast, far from the city. The waves crashed against the rocks, the stars glittered above, and for the first time in weeks, they could breathe. Ken wrapped his jacket around her shoulders and whispered, "This is real, Demet. Don't doubt it." She looked at him, her eyes shining with both love and worry. "We promised not to fall," she said softly. He smiled, shaking his head. "And thank God we did." It was the kind of moment that lived forever in memory, the kind of moment that reminded them why they were risking everything. But deep down, they both knew that secrets could only be kept for so long. The walls were closing in. The media was watching closer, the fans were noticing every detail, and even some of the crew had begun exchanging knowing looks. The promise was gone, the love was undeniable, and the truth was getting harder to hide. In her diary that night, Demet wrote, "I am happy, but I am afraid. Can I have both?" Secrets have a way of unraveling, no matter how carefully they are hidden. For Ken and Demet, the cracks began to show in ways they couldn't control. A stolen glance caught by a paparazzi camera, a laugh that seemed too genuine for just friends, a silence between them that spoke louder than words. Soon, rumors spread like wildfire, and though they denied them publicly, the truth was already out there, at least for those who knew how to see it. For Demet, it was both terrifying and liberating. She had lived so long with walls around her heart, walls built to protect her from the judgment of the world. And yet, here she was, standing on the edge of those walls, ready to leap. She remembered the night they made their promise, swearing they would never cross that line. She smiled bitterly at the memory. How foolish it had been to think they could control something as uncontrollable as love. Ken, on the other hand, never regretted breaking that promise. For him, love was worth any consequence. He didn't care about the whispers, the headlines, or the flashing cameras. All he cared about was the woman standing in front of him, the one who made his world feel alive in a way nothing else ever had. He told her once, "I would rather face the whole world against us than spend one day pretending I don't love you." And that was the truth neither of them could escape. They had promised not to fall in love. They had sworn it, repeated it, convinced themselves it was possible. But love had its own plans. Love didn't care about promises, about careers, about reputations. Love simply happened. And it happened to them in a way so undeniable that even they could no longer resist. The world outside could speculate, criticize, or idolize, it didn't matter. What mattered was the bond they shared, one forged not in grand declarations, but in quiet moments, late-night conversations, and stolen touches when no one was watching. In her diary's final entry about those days, Demet wrote, "We promised not to fall in love, but promises break. Love doesn't." And so, their story remained, complicated, fragile, but also unforgettable. Because sometimes the most powerful love stories are not the ones carefully planned or written, but the ones that defy all rules, all logic, all promises. They had promised not to fall in love. But they did. And that truth would live forever, both on screen and in the hidden corners of their hearts.